Thank you very much for being here for today's networking channel session. When I saw the slides I'm projecting now, I never thought that I would ever see my picture near Vint and Bob. Of course, I am in color and they are in black and white, so I still have some achievements to make to reach the pinnacle. It's an honor for me to have organized this session. Vince and Bob are among the most influential people in the internet community and also on what the internet is today. And I'm very happy that they have agreed to discuss their observation and their vision about how the internet has evolved and what they think its impact could be in the coming years. Okay, so I will give them the floor for a fireside chat kind of session. That's totally open. And there is a Q&A feature on Zoom. And if you have questions, please write your question short on the Zoom feature, and at the end of the session, or I will communicate your questions to Vint and Bob. So thank you very much, Vint, Bob. It's yours.
Well, first of all, thank you, Christophe, for inviting us to join you today. Bob is in Austin, Texas. I'm in Northern Virginia, and Christophe is in New York, and everyone else is online. I thought that we would start with 1973, Bob, because that's a significant year for both of us. And then we might dig into a little bit of the past and then into the future as well. But in 1973, I was at Stanford University and you were at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. You had been doing your PhD dissertation work at Harvard, if I remember correctly, but you were working at MIT at the time in a connection with the ARPANET project. And something caused you to go out to the University of Hawaii to look at their AlohaNet system. And about that same time, Bob Kahn and I were beginning to puzzle about this idea of connecting networks to each other. So maybe you could explain what brought you to the University of Hawaii and what the consequences of that were.
Well, when I arrived at Xerox PARC, I had just finished putting MIT on the ARPANET. So naturally, Xerox asked me to put Xerox on the ARPANET, and I did that. And then the lab decided to build what is arguably, not now, is arguably the first personal computer. Its name was the Alto, from Palo Alto. And we all needed somebody to network them together. Because these weren't dumb terminals, these were personal computers with considerable capability. So they were a new thing. And I was the only one who had had any networking experience. So they gave the job to, luckily for me, they gave the job to me to network. They said never occurred before in the history of the world, a building full of personal computers, one on every desk. So I scooped up from Stanford Dave Boggs, and he and I went off and built the first Ethernet.
But before you did that, the idea for Ethernet, I think, originated with an exposure you had to the AlohaNet. If I remember right, you were visiting Steve Crocker, who was at ARPA at the time, in Washington, D.C., and you found a report sitting on his coffee table about the AlohaNet. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, you had the notion that this radio-based system could be done on a coaxial cable at much higher speeds. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I give a little different, yes, but I give a little different emphasis on that. I was hunting for technologies from which to build this Ethernet thing. And one of the three problems was, how do you get the stations to take turns sending their packets on this shared cable? And the Aloha network, which I met through Steve Crocker, as you just said, had a method, a very simple method for taking turns, namely randomized retransmissions. You would send your packet, and if you happen to collide, you would randomize and try again. So that became the trouble was that the Aloha channel was unstable. It didn't have a few features. So then I fixed it, added carrier detect and collision detect and a few other things, and also put it on a coax, which took it from 9,600 bits per second to 2.94 megabits per second.
So,
And
question about that. The reason that I may have been confused, I didn't realize that you'd already started thinking about using a coaxial cable to connect all the terminals together before you went out to Hawaii. Is that so? Is that correct?
I could make something up. I'm not sure I can remember
Okay.
the order. But there were three technologies we chose for Ethernet. One was a coaxial cable with a vampire tap,
Yeah.
physical arrangement. And then there was the Aloha network randomized retransmission for taking turns. And I forget the third one.
Well, the third one was the collision detect and the backoff capability, which was part of what the Aloha net did. They basically, if they got a collision because they didn't get a confirmation of transmission, then they randomly retransmitted, but to avoid persistent collision.
Right.
But did you? Oh, then there was another idea that came along, but maybe that came from Larry Roberts, the slotted Aloha idea, where they would, if you were going to collide, it was guaranteed that you collided at a certain time, and it doubled the capacity of the system.
And Larry was moving forward with a radio things, and he came up with slotting, which did improve things. It was almost hard to send packets without slotting, since they were synchronized by the tail end of the preceding packet. It was almost automatically slotted. And we took a divergent path on coaxial cable, where you could do things like listen to the cable and detect collisions, things you could not do with radio. So we had some advantages. So that was a separate branch.
Well, obviously it worked extremely well. The reason that this is of interest to me anyway is that concurrently with your work on the Ethernet and the Park Universal Packet idea, Bob Kahn and I were thrashing around at Stanford and back at ARPA, trying to figure out how to connect different kinds of nets together. And the three nets that were available to us at the time, separate from the Ethernet, was a mobile packet radio system and a packet satellite system. Packet satellite system had the unfortunate property of significant delay. And so you would not detect the collisions until a long time after a transmission had occurred, unlike the coaxial cable, where you could sense the collision happening and stop transmitting as early with early detection. But so that system, the packet satellite system, was lossy, and so was the packet radio network because of radio shadow and collisions and the like. And so when we were trying to design protocols that could withstand this sort of loss and requirement of retransmission, that's where the TCP protocol came from. So it was kind of satisfying looking back now in history that there were 4 different kinds of packet nets to contend with, and that all had to be made to work. And that's where Bob and I came up with the gateway idea, which today is called a router. So it was I think looking back on this is really satisfying that we were able to take so many different kinds of packet switch nets and make them all look more or less uniform. So
I've been telling, you mentioned the seminar at Stanford in 1973, which I attended and you were shrewd enough to organize. I've been telling a story about that seminar, which now I can test to see if it's really true. Because you're here. It's a story about you. The subject is network number. And you and I both arrived at that seminar at Stanford intending to add a network number. You were intending to add a network number so that the ARPANET in the US could talk to the ARPANET in France. That is, you wanted an international network number, Whereas I was building Ethernets, I wanted a LAN, a local area network number. So I needed a much bigger network number than you needed. And but somehow, what did we decide? 32 was the answer in the end. 32 bits of network number.
Well, that's certainly what I ended up with. But the way Bob and I got there was that we were doing this, this internet experiment, and I thought of it as an experiment. There's no guarantee that this idea was actually going to work. And so we were thinking, well, this is just an experiment. How many networks are we likely to have to deal with? And we didn't think it was all that many. And then we thought, well, if this does work, the networks are going to be used by our allies in the military, because this thing was being built as the basis for a command and control system, computer-based command and control system. So we thought, okay, well, now we're going to have to accommodate enough networks to handle at least all of the American allies. And then we sort of thought, well, but we don't know who our allies are going to be 25 years from now. And they were different from the ones 25 years before. So we said, well, maybe we'll just have to allow for enough networks for everybody in the world to have one. Well, we thought, how many networks will there be per country? And we thought, well, maybe there would be 2, so there would be competition. And then we said, well, how many countries are there? And there wasn't any Google to ask, and we didn't know, so we guessed at 128. And then 2 per country would be 256. So it only takes 8 bits to identify 256 national level networks. So we chose 8 bits to be the network identifier. And then we said, well, how many computers will there be on each network? And we didn't know the answer to that either, but we thought, well, what the hell? How about 16 million? So we took another 24 bits for the host number. And you at Xerox PARC were thinking, as you say, from the local area net point of view, many, many more networks. And so as I recall, when you were working on the PARC Universal Packet idea, which is similar to the TCP IP idea, you chose a 48-bit address space rather than a 32-bit address space. And one of my students, Yogan Dalal, who ended up at Xerox PARC, probably while you were there maybe, was also fairly vocal about needing the larger address space.
I stole Yogan from Stanford over to Xerox.
Yogan's name is on the first December 1974 detailed description of the TCP protocol state diagram. He and Carl Sunshine and I published that in December of 1974, and then began implementing it at 3 different locations: University College London with Peter Kirstein, and Bolt Baranek and Newman with Ray Tomlinson, and then my team at Stanford. So what happens in the case of Ethernet, Bob? Eventually you chose to leave Xerox PARC and start 3Com. And is that because Xerox didn't have much interest in pursuing Ethernet as a product?
No, a lot of stories have been made up about that, most of which are not true. I left Xerox in 1979 because that's what people did in Silicon Valley. You would leave the big company and start your own. So I left, I gave Xerox 7 months notice and wrote a memo saying I was leaving to pursue, quote, entrepreneurial ambitions.
Ah, okay.
But since that time, a lot of people have made up stories about how I stormed out because Xerox refused to make something a standard, and none of which is true.
Well, speaking of standards, Bob, you must have been involved in a very interesting outcome where it was Digital Equipment Corporation, Xerox, and Intel that engineered, I guess, a standard for Ethernet. It was held or managed at IEEE. Is that, am I remembering that correctly?
You are, and it's a very long story, but in essence, antitrust regulations forced Xerox, DEC, and Intel to make Ethernet a standard rather than just use it for their products. Very long story.
It would be seen as collusion if only the 3 of you used that product?
Yes, they made a list of five. My fraternity brother, Howard Charney, was an antitrust lawyer. So I called him up and he gave me a list of five things you had to do to avoid getting in trouble. One of
Okay.
which was no marketing people could attend the meeting. There had to be a government supervisor of the meetings, and the goal had to be an open standard. So
Ah,
DEC, Intel, Xerox, DIX, DIX, I introduced them. I got credit for being the marriage broker who introduced them together. They immediately threw me out of the room because I was a loose cannon. But then we created in the fall of '79, we created IEEE Project 802. And that's a whole other exciting story with various claims of credit. In any case, we created Project 802, into which DEC, Intel, and Xerox submitted the DIX Ethernet, a 10 megabit per second new version of Ethernet. And then a couple of years later, it became an IEEE standard.
so over the course of time, of course, Ethernet has increased in its capacity pretty dramatically, but the technology has shifted in order to accommodate that. But it's still called Ethernet. I think that's kind of an interesting phenomenon.
A phenomenon which I've confronted many times over the last 50 years. And what's true is, so the question is, what is Ethernet? It's no longer vampire taps and coax. It's no longer randomized retransmissions as in Aloha. Uh, so what Ethernet has become is a brand. And the brand stands for backward compatibility, packet carrying of the internet, build it and they will come, fierce competition, de facto, de jure standards, a list of things that define the brand. And the community's done a pretty good job of policing that brand so that it keeps its promise. A brand is a promise. So Ethernet makes a bunch of promises. So they're now standardizing 800 gigabit per second quote Ethernet, and it's selling like hotcakes. It's a standard. And later, when we move on to talk about artificial intelligence, Ethernet is rearing its ugly head there too.
We should pursue that. One other thing I would observe about the Ethernet effort is that you standardized the packet format and you made it very flexible so that you could know about carrying a variety of different protocols on the same Ethernet channel, not just TCP or IP, but lots of others as well. I think that gave you a lot of longevity because as new things came along for Ethernet to carry, it had the place to say what they were so that when you got an Ether packet, you could decode it and figure out what protocol it represented. So this notion of forward thinking flexibility, I think, is embedded there. We didn't do as well, I think, in the case of Internet Protocol, because when we went from the 32-bit address space to the 128-bit address space, the IPv4 and IPv6 were not compatible. And so the adoption of v6 has been fairly slow. It's probably 30–40% or so of the internet can do IPv6, whereas Ethernet has been consistent in its packet formats and forward flexibility.
Yes, the PUP protocol at Xerox became known as Xerox Network Services XNS, and it eventually escaped Xerox, and two companies picked it up, mine, 3Com, and Novell. And so there was a period, a year or two or three or four, where TCP/IP was not there, but XNS was there. And so you had Novell and 3Com shipping millions of nodes. And then TCP/IP got ratified, and people started joining up. And my company, which had we shipped the first commercial version of TCP/IP, and then we abandoned it for XNS, and then we readopted it later on. And as you just said, the ability to carry multiple protocols, making the base protocol sort of doesn't care what protocol it's carrying.
Agnostic.
Worked out really well.
It did indeed work out very well. Well, we've got if you do want to get into AI, which I think neither one of us is expert on, we can do that. We should also allow time for people who have questions. I think I've seen already at least one question that's popped up from Esther Showalter. So on AI, of course, my company at Google is investing heavily in that. And we've just seen a gigantic announcement of a plan for spending $500 billion on building AI-based data centers, or data centers that can support AI. What's your general take on this whole AI business?
Well, if you step back 100 yards, the internet and connectivity used to be hot. But what's hot now is AI. And I think that's a false dichotomy. And this became clear to me when I interviewed Jensen Huang, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA. And Jensen, a very cool guy, apologized to me for not adopting Ethernet in his GPU chips. And as I was leaving, he was apologizing like I would be offended that NVIDIA. And as I left, I said to him, "Don't worry, we'll be back." Ethernet is back. And the fact is, there's just not one network. There are many levels of network. And what's the core technology of artificial intelligence? Neural networks. That word, networks, that's our term. That's not their term. So it turns out there are many layers of network, like you have to get out of the data center, but you also have to get down into the core of the chip. And there's several layers in between there, and they can adopt Ethernet and fiber channel and anything they want to adopt. But there's Ethernet in there, and Ethernet always seems to crop up after 50 years of cropping up. So Ethernet is back, Jensen. But I appreciate your apology, but don't worry, we'll let the rest of your networks play too, because we have a little field that lets any protocol play with TCP/IP on Ethernet.
So question is, how big is the field for identifying the protocol?
I have no idea.
Well, because that would suggest that there would be a limited number of protocols that Ethernet could continue to carry, unless the standard allows you to reuse some of the numbers.
I have no idea. I have a hunch it's a byte, but everything's a byte in Ethernet.
Okay, so that's homework for the students to go find out how many different protocols can an Ether packet.
Yeah, you're now feeling the same level of disappointment my wife feels when I can't fix our Ethernet here at home.
To say nothing of a mobile and God knows laptops and everything else. Well, look, you must have some opinions about the machine learning initiatives. You remember that when you and I were part of the ARPANET project way back in the 60s, that artificial intelligence was an important part of the agenda at ARPA. Licklider was very, very interested in that and funded research at MIT and Stanford and Carnegie Mellon. John McCarthy was at MIT, and then he went to Stanford and brought this notion of artificial intelligence with him. And the idea was, at the beginning anyway, to write software that they called heuristic programs. And my recollection was that if it didn't work all the time, it was heuristic. And if it worked all the time, it was engineering. And that sort of worked for a while. I seem to remember one program was called Moonrocks, and it was analyzing the data that you would get from when I'm forgetting the right word for this. When you heat up a substance and it starts glowing, you get a bunch of optical frequencies out of it, and that lets you figure out what elements are present in the material. There's a term for
spectroscopy.
Spectroscopy. Thank you. So this Moonrocks thing was a spectrographic heuristic program to take the spectrographic data and then estimate what the material was made out of. And there were some others that were medically related. And then for a while that didn't work very well, and we went on to the next version, which was what they called expert systems. And that was an attempt to extract from human experts the rules that they use to reason about some particular thing. Like if this symptom appears, then there's a probability of 25% that the patient has this disease, or that you should use this treatment. And there were thousands of these if then else rules that were part of the expert system. That didn't scale up very well either. And then there were some ideas that started in the 1960s, but which were not very deeply pursued, for neural networks. You remember the first one was a little one-layer neural network called a perceptron. And it didn't do very much. And if you remember Minsky and McCarthy writing a book called Perceptrons, where they kind of trashed the whole idea, and it created what some people called an AI nuclear winter. But some people continued to pursue this to multi-layer neural networks, which now have become, of course, the fashion.
Let me say something amazing. My undergraduate thesis advisor at MIT in 1968 was Marvin Minsky.
Wow.
My thesis topic was a neuron model and some of its information processing capabilities.
No kidding. Wow. I did not know that.
Marvin accepted my thesis, but he didn't like it very much. And because I wrote it on a school bus returning from a varsity tennis match, it was not a great thesis. But he encouraged me to switch fields over to networking. So I walked to the other end of the building, and there was JCR Licklider recruited me to be his networking guy. And then I watched for 50 years, I've been watching AI come and go. As you just were telling the story of it coming and going and coming and going, and it's coming and going again. But the coming and going isn't a bad thing. The coming and going is an innovation tool, really. And this AI stuff is amazing. I was interviewing a chatbot only last night on how to build a geothermal well.
Okay.
It knew a lot. This is Gemini. This happened to be Gemini.
And it gave you reasonable advice about how to. Why would you build a geothermal well? Is that to keep the house warm or something?
To replace fossil fuels and provide energy for the entire world that's clean and cheap.
Sounds like a great idea to me.
Yeah, I'm pursuing it. It's my current project. And I'm using AI. This is amazing. And so I talked to this AI for a few hours. And in the end, it tells me the temperatures of the top of the well and the bottom of the well and the recommended diameter of the well and the blah, 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 blah. And incidentally, slight digression, the mindset I'm bringing to this project is the internet mindset, which is to say, instead of one big mainframe geothermal power plant, a network of hundreds.
Yes.
Interconnected, so they could be more reliable and more maintainable and cheaper and so on. So I'm bringing the anti-mainframe mentality to geothermal wells. You'd be proud of me.
Well, I certainly am eager to learn more, Bob. Is that going to turn into another entrepreneurial experience, do you think?
Oh, not for a few years. I'm doing this as a research affiliate at MIT CSAIL. And when you start a company, you generally have to know something. And I don't.
You don't yet, at least not in this domain. Well, I can appreciate this problem. I have a project that I've been working on with our mutual friend, Steve Crocker, and others, to look at the side effects of global warming, one of which has been the melting of a lot of glaciers, especially in the Arctic region and the Antarctic region. And the problem with that, of course, is that as the glaciers melt, the sea level rises. And to make matters worse, especially in Antarctica, there's one particular glacier that's called Thwaites, and sometimes labeled the Doomsday Glacier, because if it completely melts, then it's like acting like a cork for the rest of the western ice shelf in Antarctica, and the rest of the shelf will go. And it might take a couple hundred years for that to happen. But the sea level rise would be measurable in many meters. The side effect of that is the disappearance of Florida, for example, and maybe a lot of coastal cities around the world. So we're looking at the question of how to stabilize the glaciers. And one possibility is that you literally drill down through the glacier and pump the water out from underneath which is accelerating their slide into the sea and subsequent melt. So we're looking at the feasibility of being able to do that. So maybe we could work together. You can get your AI thing. You're going to have to drill holes anyway. So maybe we could work together on that.
Oh, my house in Maine sits on the water, the Penobscot Bay there. And there's a Penobscot Bay used to be a river. 10,000 years ago, the water was 300 feet down, 300 feet. And then
Wow.
as the glacier melted, 10,000, not yesterday, 10,000 years ago, the sea level rose not 0.025 inches, but 300 feet. So now the Penobscot River is a bay, not a river anymore.
Wow. Okay, so that's what we're worried about.
Yeah, 300 feet is a worrisome. But as you say, if it's going to take a couple of hundred years, we'll have geothermal by then.
And maybe by that time we will have stopped pumping too much carbon dioxide. The problem we have is that even if we stop tomorrow, we would still have this warming effect continuing for quite some time. Well, we're off topic to some extent, except to the extent that I'm happy to hear that the AI system, the Gemini system, has been helpful to you in this topic. So since that's a product at Google, that's an advertisement.
Oh, I had lost track of that. Gemini is the Google.
Yeah, Gemini is our most recent version of artificial intelligence, and there are a variety of different variants on the Gemini engine. So I'm happy to hear
I
that.
hadn't noticed. I worked for hours with it, and I hadn't noticed it was a Google product.
Fantastic. Well, we've done a bad job of branding, given your earlier comments about the importance of branding.
Google knows a lot about branding.
Well, meanwhile, back at the ranch, I mean, if we really are going to talk about artificial intelligence, one thing that I continue to worry about is that although these systems are remarkable in their ability to produce text and imagery and sound and so on, that they also make mistakes. And sometimes it's hard to tell that it's a mistake if you don't know a lot about what you're getting back from it. So I hope that what you got from the Gemini system was accurate. Was there a way for you to verify anything?
Well, that's the principal bug with the current activity is no. Now, some of the inaccuracies, you can see them, so contradiction in the same paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
As you point out, a lot of them, you can't tell. It says the temperature is 11, and you don't know whether it's 11 or 12 or 18. So I'm attending, for the fourth year in a row now, I'm attending the Knowledge Graph Conference in New York City, where they've been, for decades, have been studying how to collect knowledge and organize it and maintain it reliably. And so the reason I attend that Knowledge Graph Conference is we have to take now the hallucinogenic AI and combine it with the knowledge-based networks, and then maybe we'll eliminate the hallucinations.
That would be very helpful if the thing becomes self-checking. In our search engine, for example, before we even introduced any of the AI component, whenever someone made a query, we would run that through the knowledge graph in order to expand the search topics so as to capture more information to present back to the person asking the question. And now, of course, we also include an element of artificial intelligence generated by artificial intelligence called an AI overview. But I've had some experiences where I think I've told you this story. I asked one of the bots to write an obituary for me. And it started out, reasonably. It said, "We're sorry to report Dr. Cerf passed away." And then it gave a date that was much too soon. I didn't like that part. And then it was describing my career, and it gave me credit for stuff I didn't do. And it gave other people credit for the stuff I did. And then it got to the family member parts. And as far as I could tell, it made up family members that I don't have. And I was trying to figure out, well, how does this happen? And I came to the belief that when the systems are being trained, they're just plucking text from this huge mass of textual material. And they don't know necessarily the context from which the text came. So your bio and my bio might be on the same web page. And you can imagine a system plucking words out of the bios and saying, what's the probability that this word would follow the following other words? So it could easily generate something that refers to your bio instead of mine, and incorrectly give me the credit for inventing Ethernet.
Well, you have a disadvantage because nobody is named Vint Cerf. There's a gazillion people named Bob Metcalfe, and I get credit for being a weatherman and being a serial rapist and
Oh my
an
God.
Ethernet.
Wow.
Plus, in the English language, it turns out that Bob Metcalfe is a common name. So count your lucky stars that you're Vint Cerf.
Wow. Thank you very much. I will count my lucky stars. I think maybe we ought to go and look at questions to see what people have. There's one in the Q&A. Looks like there are 8 altogether. So let's start with the one at the top. Oh no, let's see, what's the most recent one? Yes, the one at the top is Esther Showalter, who says, the 1976 ARPANET logical map from a history of the ARPANET, first decade, 1981, has a footnote that reads, please note that while this map shows the host population of the network according to the best information obtainable, no claim can be made for its accuracy. So is it fair to say that scientists haven't been able to accurately measure the scope and performance of the internet since just a few years after it was created? And it makes reference to Dave Walden's family webpage. So I think the short answer to that is yes, we have no idea how many things are on the internet, and we haven't known that for a long time. Would you agree with that assessment, Bob?
Yeah, but I just go to the Internet Society and I use the round numbers that they have. In fact, I just updated my slide yesterday, and it's now 5.62 billion people, and it's 67% of the population of Earth. 3 significant digits.
Well, what about number of devices, though, which I think Esther was trying to get at?
Oh, I missed that. That's right. Devices like the servers that are behind the firewalls, those things?
Yeah, if you don't know how many there are. So there are certainly have to be many billions of devices that are on the net.
So NAT strikes again.
Yes.
We can't count, we still stuck with version 4 because of NATs, and now we can't know how many devices because of NATs.
Yes.
What is it? Network address translation.
Translation. That's right. And you know, it's odd in a way. When the ARPANET was being built, we had IMPs, and they had a very limited number of hosts that they could support, like 4. And so we invented a NAT-like thing using the IP protocol in order to allow for more than 4 hosts on any one IMP. And so we're unknowingly playing the same game with the earlier ARPANET. And I guess I kind of regret all that now that I think about it. I wish that what had happened is that when V6 was adopted in 1996, when the network was still fairly small, that we just rushed to get V6 implemented everywhere. But if you think about history, we were right in the middle of the so-called dot boom, because the previous year in 1995, Netscape Communications had gone public and the stock had gone through the roof. I think they were going to open at 14. They switched to 28 in the last minute, and they ended that day at 56. And from that moment on, the venture people were throwing money at anything that looked like it might have something to do with internet. And so nobody was paying any attention to IPv6. And besides, no one had run out of V4 address space at that point. So there was still plenty of room.
So MIT had an IMP number 6. I was given one of the 4 ports to connect a PDP-10 to, and but there were 3 other guys connecting their hosts to the same IMP. And then we started sending traffic to each other. And then we reported our traffic destinations to ARPA. 9 packets went to BBN, 20 packets to UCLA, so on. And the biggest number in our report was the number of packets that did not leave the 9th floor of
Yeah.
MIT Tech Square.
Yes.
Little did we know we had built a prototype LAN, a local area
Yes.
network.
You had indeed. And you know that if I think I'm attributing this correctly, Len Kleinrock referred to that kind of traffic as incestuous traffic.
That's my term.
Was that your term? Okay. Sorry about that. Okay.
That's an existing term. It refers to
Yes.
a bad thing, incest. And in any case, a few months later, Ethernet got invented. So it was like it's like those 4 hosts on the 9th floor of Tech Square were a prototype LAN. And then I went to Xerox and built a real LAN.
So let's go to the next question from Kamal Sadani, who says, hi all, could AI be used to analyze and unify RFCs from the IETF, proposing an optimized redesign of TCP/IP to reduce fragmentation and meet modern network demands? Would this lead to more efficient, scalable, and coherent internet architecture? Well, my answer to that one, Kamal, is that a replacement's already been invented. It's called QUIC, Q-U-I-C. And it's much more efficient than the TCP/IP protocols are. It runs on UDP. It allows multiple concurrent streams within a given quick connection, and it allows for cryptographic protection of all the data, and it allows for rapid reconnection of a broken connection. So in a sense, we don't need to have a redesign of TCP/IP because QUIC has already done that. But the more generic question, I guess, is there a possibility that AI could invent something? We have AIs that write software now, usually upon being prompted to do so. I don't know of any AI that's decided on its own to just generate a piece of software. Do you, Bob?
No, but the big answer to the question is you just type the question into Gemini and it will answer it for you. And you can load all the RFCs into a special library, augment the LLM, and you might want to do that with the RFCs because that'll give you more focus on the answer to the question.
So that's actually something that we have done at Google. It's called Notebook LM.
Yeah.
And it's a large language model, which is there's a foundational model behind it, but then you ingest whatever amount of material you wish, like all the RFCs. And then when you start asking questions, the answers are just as you say, colored by the newly ingested material. So that's an interesting experiment. Maybe that would be worth trying out.
It takes 5 minutes to try Notebook LM, and I have tried it. I put the Ethernet paper, the 1976 Ethernet paper, just that paper, into it, and it proceeded to create a podcast of 2 people, a male and a female, not human, but male and female. And they discussed this 1976 paper while I listened to it. It's amazing. You can try it in 5 minutes. Notebook LM.
Yes, it's pretty fascinating.
Boy, I'm touting another Google product here.
Yes, you are. Then, for the benefit of everybody listening, this was not a planned arrangement. I didn't bribe Bob to tout our products at Google. They're just good on their own. Let's go to Jim Carosa, who used to run the science operation at the National Science Foundation. He asked a question for Bob and Vint. Many students participate in the networking channel events. What pieces of advice or thoughts would you pass on to students, undergrad or grad, looking forward to careers in networking systems and computing? So how would you answer that?
I would say, first of all, and I have a talk that I give on this topic, connectivity is a thing. And it's a very promising thing. I've already tried to make the point that it's the underpinning of artificial intelligence, but connectivity is broadly applicable. So you would be wise, you are already wise, to be studying connectivity. And the internet is a bunch of experiments that worked out. And so it's good to study the internet for lessons on how to go forward with other forms of connectivity. So for example, the layering of protocols, which we did in various ways from the very beginning, I remember Hubert Zimmerman touting the ISO 12,
Right.
7 levels. Layering is a good architectural tool that it worked out for us. Allowed me to work on Ethernet while you were working on TCP/IP because we had layers. That's a good idea. Open protocols is a good idea. That worked out. IBM had a protocol called SNA at the same time. DEC had DECnet, and it turned out to be a much better idea to have a protocol that could unify all of those computers. So that's a good one. So there's 2 right off the top. So my advice is study the lessons of the internet, and that'll guide you well in your career in connectivity.
So I've written an article called Connectivity is Everything, and it draws on exactly the kinds of observations that Bob has just made. But this is about career thinking. And, you must be, get the same phenomenon I do, Bob. Young people come and say, can you help me plan my career? And my reaction to this is, don't try. Nobody who has been successful that I know of has ever planned their careers. But what they have done is been alert to opportunity when it shows up. And sometimes you create your own opportunities in the way that you did in 1979 when you left Xerox PARC. So my advice is don't try to plan your career, be alert to opportunity. And oh, by the way, there are 3 other things that you should try to satisfy. The first one is whatever you do in your career, you should do something that you like doing. Because if you don't like doing it, it's not going to be very satisfying. Second, you should be good at it. Because if you're not good at it, it's hard to make a career out of it. And the third thing is that you should be able to make a living at whatever it is that you like doing. And if you can satisfy those 3 things, you have a pretty good formula for an interesting career. I guess I'd point out one other thing. People are living pretty long now. I mean, Bob, you and I are in our 80s. At least I am. I think you must be close to that.
I'm going to turn 79 soon, not 80.
Not 80. Okay, so you're getting close. The point I want to make, though, is that you and I both have very long careers. And during those careers, lots and lots of things have been invented. We've had to learn new things in order to be relevant and useful. So we're going to have to keep learning. And people have to recognize that to have a very long career, you have to keep learning new things in order to stay relevant. So learning is still as important in later life as it is at the beginning.
Which is another reason to question the future of the 4-year college.
Really good point. Yes. Yeah, you can't learn enough in 4 years to satisfy a 50-year career.
And you can't stop learning at the end of the 4 years because the world's changing.
Yeah, exactly right. An anonymous attendee asks, what's your take on artificial general intelligence? Which scientific path do you predict is most probable to AGI? Maybe he's saying when would artificial intelligence be most useful in which sciences? Well, I would say for sure we have a lot of evidence that on the biology side, AI is proving to be quite helpful. Look at what has happened with the DeepMind team at Google and their AlphaFold experiment with AI, where they were able to model 200 million proteins and their shapes, how they fold up, which gives us a dictionary of proteins that can be produced with human DNA by interpretation of human DNA. So biological science, medical diagnosis and the like seems to be a good path. The other thing that we noted at Google is that machine learning, not necessarily just large language models, also can be quite powerful in the presence of predictable statistics. So data center cooling has been improved dramatically by using AI to manage the pumps and the valves of the data center to cool it at a reduced power requirement. So I think that there is going to be a lot of applications for these technologies. What's your take on this, Bob?
I'm not an expert, but I did notice about your comments just now. You mentioned a bunch of things which are not AGI. Human beings are not good at analyzing 200 million statistical proteins. So you were describing uses of AI, but not AGI. That's a different topic.
Well, okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
So arithmetic, I'm really good at arithmetic, and I'm pretty sure the AGIs can do arithmetic by now. integrate
some
science data. I'm not very good at that, but I bet you that's happening now.
something is happening in the implementations. We've gone from very, very large language models to smaller ones that are specialized, kind of like the case you were describing with the notebook LM. And the consequence of that is that the AI, or maybe the AGI, can be smart enough, I'll use that word, to call on specialist models to do specific things, whether it's activating AlphaFold or calling on something to do a mathematical calculation or something else. So we may see some interesting combinations of AI-based systems doing things that are well beyond what you and I could do as people. We have 15 questions altogether, and we have only 8 minutes left, so maybe we should move ahead here. Akram says, is it expected to see quantum optical network in the future? Does softwareization like SDN and NFV play a role in it, if any? The short answer is yes. We are, all of us who are dealing with optical networks, are looking at their ability to carry photons that have been entangled. That's of real interest. I don't think that SDN and NFV will particularly play a role there. You need special hardware in order to relay an entangled photon without losing its entanglement. Anything from you, Bob, on that one?
No comment. I'm focused on geothermal wells.
Okay, fair enough. Dirk asks a question, what are the most pressing research issues that the internet research community, academia, IRTF should address in your opinion? You want to take that one?
Short answer, security.
Yes, amen.
The internet is too vulnerable to bad guys.
Would you agree, Bob, that security and safety are not necessarily the same thing, and that safety is another major concern? Imagine using an encrypted email and nobody can see it until it gets decrypted, and then it presents, a malicious phishing attack. So security and safety are probably not quite the same, but both need attention.
I'm not in deep enough to even distinguish the two. I can't tell.
Fair enough. The anonymous attendee says the Fireside chat abstract mentioned you might comment on digital object architecture, which got me wondering what about it was on your mind. That's a Bob Kahn thing. And when I wrote that, I was thinking that I was having an interview with Bob Kahn, not Bob Metcalfe. That was too many Bobs in the world. So the short story there is that if you go and Google digital object architecture or digital object identifiers, or look up the Corporation for National Research Initiatives, you'll find a lot of information about digital object architecture. But the whole idea is that digital objects, which could be anything you can digitize, could have a label on them that's permanent. And as long as you know what the label is, the theory is with a resolver, you could find it. And that would be good for the longevity of digital content.
Let the record show how proud I am to stand in for Bob Kahn.
Maria Jose Monpetit says, we talk a lot about AI for networks. How about networks for AI? Well, I think you actually implied that already by pointing out that all of those AI-based systems have to be connected with neural networks.
And they're not all routers. I mean, the Ethernet that occurs in the plumbing among the GPUs is different from the Ethernet that you might use to get out of the data center. So there are many types of networks. And so the important thing is you should become expert in connectivity, because that is an advancing field, including AI.
So we're going to run out of time here, but we'll keep going. Swati Goswami says, could you please talk about how the application of the end-to-end principle evolved over the years? Well, it kind of disappeared in a way because of all the middle boxes that get in the way and mess around with the headers of the protocols. So there's the middle boxes have really kind of messed up the whole end-to-end idea. I don't know whether you have an opinion about that, Bob.
I'm not familiar with the terminology. That's how
faded
it is.
Well, end-to-end is, the whole idea was that the packets of the internet are carried without modification from source to destination. And the thing that the receiver gets is exactly what the sender sent.
Oh, yeah.
And less true now than it used to be. And frankly, because of all of the encapsulation and tunneling and everything else, the end-to-end idea, as pristine as it seemed at the time, is no longer a good description of what actually goes on. There's a whole book on this subject written by, let's see, do I have a copy of this? Yeah, here it is. This is called The Real Network Architecture. And it describes a lot about what's going on in tunneling and everything. Pamela Zave and Jennifer Rexford are the two authors. So I would recommend that if you want a good answer to that question. Akram says AI has shown drastic energy consumption, while many research directions target green networking to improve energy efficiency. What would be your opinion about that? And the answer is geothermal wells.
Geothermal wells is a partial answer. I think too much is made of that issue. I think it's a transient thing going on right now. And we heard yesterday, we're about to build $500 billion servers to do our AI for us. There is, in the accounting of energy use, there is a missing factor that I would like to remind us of. You run your programs in order to optimize some system. So the energy saving is over there. It's not over here.
Yeah, good
You
point.
run a weather simulation that causes you to fix global climate change. Somebody has to account for the benefit of reducing global climate change and pit that against the cost of the energy to run the simulations. See what I'm saying? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we're missing in our accounting of the use of energy. You got to count the energy that's saved by the answers.
That's a really good point. That's the same argument for saying that GDP is a bad metric, because it doesn't take, it's only additive. It doesn't take into account the damage that some of the GDP generating activities produce. And so we don't subtract that from the value of GDP.
Yeah, but also the benefits of GDP.
Right.
The same. I remember Bob Noyce used to say that his chips improve things by a factor of 1,000, but the GDP counted the revenue from the chip, which was steadily going down and down and down.
Good point. Good point.
So be sure to include the benefits when you do this follow-up accounting.
I'm skipping ahead here a little bit to try to find one last question that we can answer. It says, thanks. This is Haitam. It says, thanks for the interesting discussion. My question, according to Ilya Sutskever, he's an AI guy, that AI development is approaching, AI is reaching peak data as it hits the limits of the internet. How do you reflect on that? Are we hitting the walls of the internet we have? The answer is we've always hit the walls on the internet. We've always built bigger, channels for it. As Bob points out, 800 gigabits a second is becoming a reality, and it is a reality in some places. And I've seen some experiments at 1.6 terabits a second per optical channel. So I don't think we're going to run out of capacity anytime soon. And we are at time, and so we'll turn this back over to Christophe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vint. So thanks for this conversation. I think that the three words that come to mind for the conversation was honest, humble, and fun. And I'm very proud of having hosted you two for this presentation. Thanks again, Vint and Bob. The presentation will be available on YouTube, I suspect. And people will be able to watch it. And very often, presentation have many more viewers online than they have as real-time participants. I am supposed to introduce the next presentation, which will take me to project the next slide.
Well, let's see. Christophe, does that mean that Bob and I can exit now? Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I just have 1 minute to introduce the slide. Thanks a lot to you both.
Okay, thanks so
for
much.
all of us.
We appreciate your invitation. Bye-bye for now.
Bye. Thank you. So the next event, if you can see my slide, is going to be a fireside chat. It's becoming very popular with Paul Mocapetris, who is also one of the most influential people in the internet as the inventor of the DNS. Talking to Paul is always very entertaining, and we learn a lot. So I think thanks to Serge and Jim for organizing this session in 2 weeks from now. And goodbye, and see you soon on the networking channel. Bye-bye.